Welcome back, guys. It's craft time. In today's video, we are decoupaging all the things, all of them. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to start out with this wander sign. This is a sign from my daughter's original nursery that my lovely best friend Lisa had given us. She had painted it to the colors of her nursery at the time, and she pretty much decorated or provided the decorations for the entire thing. My daughter will be turning 5 this year, so I think it's time to go ahead and let this one go. So we're just going to revamp it a little bit. I'm going to start by taking off this rope that gives you the option to hang from there just as an added decoration piece. However, it does still have some hangers on the back, so we'll just remove that and leave those original hangers. That way it can still hang or sit if needed. And then we're going to pick some tissue paper that we like that would go well. I love these flowers. I think they're really fun. I think they really fit the wander vibe. I would love to go wandering through a field of flowers as beautiful as this. I'm going to keep that original color on the background. It will come through a bit once we decoupage this on here. However, I think it goes really well, and I think it will kind of mesh really nicely. So we're going to start by just picking out the piece of tissue paper that we want to use, and we're going to size it down to a more reasonable size, one that's easier to maintain while we go through the process. I like to kind of lay mine down, get an overlap of about 1 inch on each side, just to make it way more manageable, but also to where I don't have to fight and line it up perfectly once I actually go to decoupage this on. I will say that there are many different ways to do decoupage. I'm going to stick with the original. We're going to use these phalanges and some paintbrushes to Mod Podge this right on here. So I'm going to kind of line it up, again, still cutting it down to size. You want it to be a little bigger than the object that you're putting it on, and then we're going to move forward. Some people use a mini heat press or iron to do their Mod Podgings. Others use saran wrap and like a rolling brayer. I don't know that everybody has those at their access, so again, I'm going to be doing this the good old-fashioned way, and if you've never done it or you just need to kind of brush up on some tips and tricks, that's what this video is for. And I want to show you this sign in particular because of all of the tight little crevices and things that you have to get into to get those nice clean edges sanded back, which is how we're going to be removing the edges. We're going to use a sander, and so we're going to just jump right in with one that's pretty difficult so I can show you the techniques and the easiest ways to do this. So here you see me putting on some Mod Podge. I am using the dishwasher safe one. I just like to go ahead and use this whether it's decorations for indoor or outdoor, because after 28 days it does set and cure, and when it cures it becomes waterproof or dishwasher safe, and that just lets me know that even if this was an indoor piece, if it was sitting on a shelf or a coffee table or something and someone spilt something over, the piece isn't going to be ruined. It would have a little bit more of a layer of protection. So I'm using that, and you can see me here just painting it all over the entire surface that I want this tissue paper to stick to. Now, you can do this in sections or you can do it all at once. Throughout this video, I'm going to show you the different ways. In this one, I'm doing it all at once, and I am just going to make sure I have a healthy coat of this Mod Podge everywhere, but nice, smooth, even layer. I don't want any like puddles or streaks or globs of the Mod Podge because it might make it wrinkle up more in one area than the other. And then we're going to put it down. So you see I've kind of folded it in half so I can kind of control where it falls. I'm going to start here at the bottom, I'm going to push it down, and then from the middle, I'm going to push it up. I'm just lightly gliding my hands over it. This tissue paper is a little thicker, so the Mod Podge underneath is not coming through. However, if you are finding a tackiness, you can put your hand inside of a Ziploc bag or lay down some saran wrap. That way you can use that as a protector to where the tissue paper is not sticking to your fingers and ripping or moving, and then you can smooth out those wrinkles. This works for me, so I'm just going to use my fingers, smooth it down, and then I'm going to begin to cut back the rest of the excess. I like to do this because I'm a very visual person and I kind of want to see the outline of what I'm doing. So I'm cutting off all of that excess. I'm going to cut in and around the wording just to make it a little more manageable so I can kind of see where I'm at, and that way I can really get in there on my edges whenever I go to do the top coat. Once I've got that the way I like it, I'm going to take the same brush and the same Mod Podge, and I'm just going to brush over top of the entire item. You do not want to put this on too thick. However, you want it thick enough to where it's going to kind of absorb through the paper and stick to the product. So this is really going to be where you test out or kind of have like a learning curve of what works best for you and the products that you're using. So I'm going to do tissue paper in this. I'm also going to use some napkins, and it's going to be different amounts for the different items, and it's also going to depend on what you're sticking the paper to. So here I'm just going to put on a nice even layer on top of the entire tissue paper. I'm always going to work outward towards my edges, so from the center out, depending on which way the paper is facing. That way we're not accidentally peeling back any of the paper or catching it and wrinkling it or moving it. So always think about that. Work from the center out to your edges, and then once you have that done and you've worked all of those edges really nice and well, I like to go through and kind of just smooth everything out, make sure I'm not missing any bubbles or any like puddles of Mod Podge anywhere, and then you're gonna let it dry. This is where a heat gun would come in very handy. I have this one that I got off of Amazon. It is linked in my affiliate links in the description. Wasn't very expensive, but it gets the job done. It has a high and a low, and I like to take it and just hit it with some high heat all over for a little while, and then I just set it to the side and let it dry for another 5 to 10 minutes. You can kind of touch it to make sure there's no tack left to it. You want it to be completely dry before you try to sand anything back. So I'm just, again, going to hit it with my heat gun and then let it finish air drying. And then when I come back to it, if it doesn't feel like it is fully wet or it does have a couple spots that need a little bit more attention, I will bring my heat gun back out just to go ahead and finish those up. And then I'm going to cut slits in all of this paper. So when you have a sign like this or something that's not just like a plain shape, like a square or a heart or a circle or whatever, it's easier to manage the paper when you go ahead and cut slits where you're going to need it to kind of fold or give. This particular tissue paper, I wouldn't say it shrunk, but it definitely tightened up after it dried, and it was kind of pulling away from itself. And also when I want to go do the next step of sanding, it just helps prevent further rips or accidents. So I'm just taking my scissors and I'm cutting out any of the excess that's in between the letters, or just cutting a slit in between the letters. That way that paper can move a little more freely and it's not pulling against itself when it's stretching over to the next letter. And that's going to allow me to, one, see around any of my edges that might be a little looser than they need to be, that need a little bit more Mod Podge that I can just paint down. And it's also going to allow me to get my sanding block or whatever you're using to sand in between those letters without that paper pulling or ripping and causing damage to all of the hard work you've already put in. After we let any of the touch-up areas dry completely, we are ready to sand. Now I have here a sanding block, which I recommend if you're a crafter or planning to do regular crafts, get yourself a medium grit, which usually falls around the, I don't know, mine's a 120. I like this one a lot because it is fine enough to do any like finishing areas that I need, but also still strong enough to be able to handle a little bit more grit that needs to be done without having to actually go pull out my sand or anything. It's just more for touch-ups and just easy sanding products. So yeah, I definitely recommend you having one. I just got this one from my local hardware store. And then I'm also using a piece of sandpaper here. That way I can get into any of those cracks and crevices that the sanding block is too thick to fit into. So the motion that I like to use, like you always want to do a downward motion. However, I kind of like to go down and diagonal. I feel like that just makes it go a little bit faster for me. This is just a personal preference. As long as you're always doing a downward motion, it's going to work from you. You're just going to rub it over that area a few times. It's going to cut/rip that paper perfectly to go along all of those cracks and crevices, and it's going to leave you with a nice, smooth, crisp edge that is going to follow that product line exactly where you need it to be. So in the places the sanding block doesn't fit, again, I'm going to be using the sanding paper. I'm just going to fold it up and then kind of put it into all of those crevices and work them out. That way I can get all of that paper out from in there. And then if you are finding that the sandpaper is a little too rough and it's already starting to rip, I like to just rub my fingernail on it sometimes to finish up the job without damaging the item that's underneath. I'm going to show you how to do these smaller areas, like right here, this little teardrops shape in the W. Again, I'm going to use some scissors or something to poke through there so I'm not ripping it. And then I'm going to use the sandpaper to kind of very slowly push downward. Again, we always want downward motions. If you go up, you're going to be pulling the paper off of the product and possibly cause a rip on the surface, and it's going to ruin your project. So make sure you're always pushing downward, or even if there's some issues you can't push down, sideways very gently, because that could also rip the paper. So the next one I'm going to show you, I have this really tiny hole right here on the R, and I poked a hole in it, and then I kind of rolled my paper into a cone and put it in there and just rubbed it back and forth. That's the sideway motion I was just talking about. And that's how I get into those really tiny crevices that need to be cleaned up and cleaned out. So again, I wanted to use this sign as a really good example on how to get into all of those crooks and crevices. If you're curious how people make that happen, this is it. We're using different tools to get into those areas and always doing a downward motion. If you can't do it, then sideways very gently so you're not ripping the paper, and it has to be completely dry. Now you will see here I am fixing a little spot where I did have a bit of a rip. I was able to save the paper that was on there, and so I'm just going to use some Mod Podge and push it back down, and it flattens out perfectly and you can't even tell that it happened. I'm going to let it dry, and for the rest of this sign I am going to go ahead and add some Waverly wax just to cover up some of these painted areas that I don't want to be painted and just clean it up. Again, this sign is multiple years old, so I'm just going to bring a little bit of life back into it, make that brown pop a little bit more so that it's more of a finished product. And then this one is done. So I really hope that this helped you guys learn a little bit, and I'm really happy with how this turned out. Our next project we're going to be working on are these two little wooden hearts. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like whenever you don't paint anything on the background. This is just raw wood. These are little hearts that are left over from a project I did, and they are from the Dollar Tree. I'm again using some tissue paper, and I'm also going to use a napkin on the other one. I have already prepped the napkin in this one. However, I do show you how to properly prep a napkin for Mod Podging when we get to the signs where I did the yellow signs for like shelf sitters or tiered trays. So I'll go more into detail on the prepping of that in that stage, so you can stay tuned for that. Here you see me, again, I'm not going to paint this at all. I am simply going to add my Mod Podge. I'm using the same one. They make different kinds and different sheens, and so I'm using the dishwasher safe one, and I'm just going to paint on a healthy, even layer. Again, no globs, no lines, no puddles anywhere. And then I'm going to cover the whole surface, and also if you have any run over on any of the edges, clean that up, and then place your tissue paper down right on top. I'm going to put my tissue paper starting from the bottom, lay it over, and then you can see me pressing from the middle outward with my fingers just to smooth the tissue paper, and then I am using my brush to paint that decoupage on top, again from in the center outward to those edges to where it doesn't peel back, covering it really well. Again, this tissue paper is a little bit thicker and it has like a glossy sheen on it, so I'm using a little bit more than I would have to with a different type of paper. I'm just going to finish that up. When I get it to my likings, I'm going to set it aside and start in on the second heart. I'm going to do a decent amount of Mod Podge on here. However, I am going to have to adjust the amount that I do because a napkin absorbs way more, and it's a lot thinner than that tissue paper. So keep that in mind. There is a learning curve to this based on the materials you're using. So I just adjusted the amount that I needed, set my napkin down on top of it where I wanted the image to go, and then again from the middle outward use my fingers to smooth that napkin out. And now I'm applying the Mod Podge to get that top layer on. That's going to help seal it in and keep it from coming off. Once that's nice and dry, it's time to start in with our sanding block. I'm just going to go with a downward diagonal motion until that rips perfectly off along that edge. You just want to gently pull it back if it doesn't just fall off on its own. And then you just keep going around it until you have gotten all of that extra napkin around the edges taken care of. For the middle portion, I am going to be taking my scissors and cutting a slit in both directions of the heart. That way that paper can move more forgivingly. That way I can get my sanding paper inside of there to remove all of those edges. So I'm just going to poke out the middle to get some of that excess material out, and then I'm going to rub the edges down until I have cleaned out all of the extra page, leaving me nice crisp lines. I'm going to repeat that process for both of them, and I'm loving how these are turning out. I really like this sunflower tissue paper. Here I have a string from a hanger from Dollar Tree that I had taken off and just kept for reuse for a different project, which works perfectly for both of these little tags. I'm just going to cut it in half using half the beads for one and half for the other, and tie a knot in the top. The knot's going to keep those beads from coming off. And then it does already have that plastic piece on the bottom for me to add these on really easy. So all I'm going to do is push that back through. The wood piece, it does have a little hole in that all I did was take a mini screwdriver and poke through the paper, that I can just thread that through and then bend it down the proper way, and that is it. I did go back through with some Waverly wax and darken the beads for the sunflower heart to just make it match a little better, but I love these little tags. For the third project, we're going to be taking this old welcome sign that I thrifted probably over a year ago, and this cute little bird that I thrifted this spring, and turning them into one item. I'm going to start by taking my orbital sander and sanding down this entire welcome sign to give me a nice fresh start, and to make sure that those letters and images that were on there don't leave any bumps or any residue, to where I can tell that it was there underneath the paper I'm putting down. So I went outside, sanded that really well, and now I'm just wiping it all down and cleaning it up so that all of the dust is gone and it's not going to interfere with the project. I'm just using a baby wipe to wipe it all down, and then I did decide that I didn't want the old hanger on there. It's a little bit rusty and crusty, and so I thought I would just go ahead and replace it. I have the D-loop hoop or D-hooks or whatever you call them that I'm going to replace it with once I'm ready. And then I like all of my backs to look complete as well, so I'm just going to go in with some black chalk paint and paint it up just to make it kind of neutralize it, make it look new again. And I'm just going to do a nice coat on that, and then I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to do a nice 2 coats of the white chalk paint that I have here to again neutralize the front of the sign. I'm just going to make sure that I've covered this entire thing to give me one smooth surface, and I'm going to do that by taking that white chalk paint and I'm going to mix it in some water. I like to do this with my chalk paint because it makes it go over a little smoother. It just kind of thins it down so it's not thick and chunky to where it just kind of blobs on your image or item that you're painting, and it helps you kind of just smooth it out a little better and get a more even coat. So that's what I did to be able to make this glide on there nice and easy. Also, you're going to see here that I have a little bit of bleeding through from that old piece of wood, where it just starts to yellow my paint or turn it brown. To stop this, you can use shellac. I do have shellac on hand, but I'm not worried about this because if it comes through my tissue paper that I'm going to use, it's going to match the bird that's going to go on there, and I am okay and open to those yellow tones. However, if you don't want that, then you need to go ahead and do a coat of shellac. They do make it in a spray can form that you can just spray it on there really good. Some people say you can use a clear coat, like primer or clear spray paint. I've tried that before and it did not work for me. So if you want to save a little time, I would just try the shellac method, and that will help stop, if you're using old wood for a project and you're having bleeding through, it'll help seal it up so that it stops happening. So just a little tip for you. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to let that dry, use my heat gun to kind of help speed it along, and then we're going to get our tissue paper out. I have this really pretty tissue paper here that has like this bronzy goldish shimmer to it, and I really like it, and I think it's going to go really beautifully with this bird. So again, I'm just going to lay it down over my item here, and I'm going to cut it down into a manageable size. One, we don't want to waste the material, so we can save the excess for another project, but two, it makes it a lot easier to maneuver around and to be able to control the tissue paper if we cut it down before we start our project. So I'm just kind of placing it, seeing how I want the image to lay, and then I'm going to do this in sections. I'm going to use that same Mod Podge, the dishwasher safe. It's the blue label or teal label, turquoise label, whatever color you want to call it. So I'm going to start by applying a nice even coat on just this top portion of the board, and I'm just going to do it all the way to the edges, making sure that, again, it's nice and even. There's no puddles, there's no lines. I'm sorry I keep repeating myself, but it's so important and it's going to make all the difference in your project. So I'm just going to continue to drill that in to just make your projects turn out better. Well, once I've got that nice and smooth, I'm going to pick up my tissue paper, start from one end, and slowly start to lay it down. And I'm going to use my finger and push it down in the middle and then work my way to the edges. Again, if you've skipped to this point of the video, if the Mod Podge is already coming through the paper and sticking to your fingers at all, you can put your hand in a Ziploc bag or put some saran wrap down and use that to flatten out any of the wrinkles. Once you're happy with that, like here, I have a little part on the edge where it's not sticking too well. I'm going to peel it back just slightly and add a little bit more so it sticks. And then I'm going to go ahead and start doing the Mod Podge coat on top. I'm going to start and make sure I'm working from the middle out and hitting all of my edges to make sure that they are nice and secure and staying down. I'm going to just keep working that until I'm happy. And then I also like to, even when I'm painting, I like to kind of smooth out all of my brush strokes and make them go in the same direction. So you'll see me doing that multiple times too. Once I'm happy, I'm going to move to the next section. I'm just going to pick that tissue paper up out of the way, and I'm going to brush on my next layer of Mod Podge in the next section. I'm going to make sure it's all the way out to the edges in even nice strokes, and then I'm going to lay the paper back down slowly, working from the side that it's already stuck to down towards the area that's not Mod Podged yet. This is just going to help get out any of the air and wrinkles to the best of its ability. And then I always like to start in the middle and again work my way out to the edges. This way you pushing the air from the middle out instead of capturing the air and pushing it into the middle and causing more wrinkles or air bubbles. So here I used my brush instead of the finger, which is not something I typically do, and I didn't super love the results, so I'll switch back over to my fingers here in a second, which is why in all my videos you'll notice I constantly have things all over my hands because we have some of the best tools attached to our bodies, so why not use them? Again, just keep repeating the process from middle out, and then we're going to finish it off with that third section. Peel back the part that is not yet stuck, paint down your Mod Podge, lay the rest down, and then do your top layer working from the center to the edge. Once it's all down where I want it to be, I'm going to come back through with my brush and I'm just going to hit, again, changing my brush strokes to be in the same direction. That way when it dries, they're less noticeable. I'm also in this process adding a little bit more Mod Podge in any area that I think needs and making sure all of my edges are nice and covered. That way when it dries, there's least amount of touch-ups to do and none of them are peeling back. I'm going to get my heat gun out and help this along by adding a little bit of heat and air to dry, and then once I'm satisfied with that and at a point where it can air dry on its own a little faster, I'm just going to push it aside and work on the next piece for this project. I thrifted this little bird piece here this spring. I think it's super cute, but I really want it to match the vibe of this sign that I'm making, or wall hanger, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to use this aged bronze metallic paint to help do the trick. So I'm going to start with just painting really lightly on the viney parts. So you can't really tell in this portion of the video right here, but it's already got like a brown and green tone to it, kind of like intermixed, almost like an aged look to it. So I don't want to fully cover that up, but I do want to get a nice thin coat on here to where it is shiny and sparkly to kind of match that tissue paper for all of the shiny and sparkly parts in it. And the colors match really well too, which I was super happy about because I did not pre-plan this project to where I had paint that matched. So you can see the nice shine here, and then we're gonna move on and kind of make the rest of the bird fit. So here I'm using the color Seaside and Sage together to paint those leaves up. I want to make those leaves colors match that tissue paper a little bit better than they do now with that brighter green. So I'm just going to use this to kind of tone it back a little bit, make it look a little more elegant. And I'm just going to intermix those two colors, not mix them together, but just separately put them on my brush and let them naturally come together through the brush strokes as I layer them on. And then from there, I wanted to add a little bit of texture. So I'm going to pull out a little detailed brush that I have. Sometimes your girl is real bad at rinsing her brushes, so I rinse them, but not always thoroughly. So I ruined this detail brush by not getting all of the paint out of it, but it gave it a little bit of texture. Some of the bristles are dried together, so when I use it now, it leaves more like of a harsh brush stroke, which is perfect for leaving some texture on these leaves. So I'm just going to go in and paint some diagonal lines up each side of the leaves to represent like the veins in the leaves, and just give it a little bit more dimension and a little bit more texture to the leaves so they're not just so bland, I guess. I'm going to repeat that process on the other side. However, I'm not going to make you watch me repeat that twice. From there, I'm going to tone the birdie back a little bit. He's super cute, but the yellow and black is a little bit harsh for the colors represented in the tissue paper. So I'm going to take this light yellow that I had pre-mixed for some other things that I painted up for Easter. It's just white chalk paint mixed with some yellow acrylic paint to make a really light pale yellow. And I'm just going to paint the entire bird in a good solid coat of this and then dry it out with my heat gun, which that's why we love chalk paint. We can just dry it up instantly. And then I'm going to take some baby wipes and paper towels and I'm going to do a wet distress on this and just distress it back a little bit to give it, make those details still pop and the underneath colors still come through without making it so harsh. So I'm just going to do that back to my likings. And once it's ready, I'm going to kind of lay it down, see if I like it, and set it aside. I'm going to let it dry really well. During this time, our tissue paper and Mod Podge have been sitting back there drying, and I'm just going to check it, make sure it's nice and dry so that I can go ahead and sand off those edges. Again, you want to use a downward motion. I prefer a downward diagonal motion. So just like you've seen in the other projects prior to this one in this video, we're going to do that all the way around, and we're going to trim back all of that paper to where it gives us those nice clean, crisp lines following the exact design of the item that we are working on. Now I want to pay attention to my border. Again, it just has that base coat that I had put down of that white chalk paint. And though it looks great the way it is, I really want this to kind of pull together, and I want these items to look as if they were always one. So I'm going to use that same aged bronze metallic paint, and I'm going to paint the entire border. I'm not doing a super thick coat or anything, or like a super solid coat. It's kind of like a transparent paint once you start to put it down. And I really like the way that looks. It looks a little bit aged only in the color, but in the technique of how I'm painting it on. So that gives it a little bit more dimension, and I think looks really nice on this piece. Then once I was putting the bird on there, kind of like trying to visualize the end product, I really thought it needed something else, and I wanted it to all look cohesive. Again, my goal is to make these two items look like they were always together. They were always one piece. So I noticed the leaves in the background on the tissue paper, and I decided to paint some of those details back in on the actual leaves on the bird item to match those same markings in the tissue paper. That way they kind of go together and they're a little more cohesive. I set that aside to dry, and now I'm going to get my Mod Podge back out and do my final layer. I do this with all of my projects whenever I'm doing the Mod Podging. This one I wanted to go ahead and get the border painted before I did it. This just kind of helps make sure all of my edges are nice and sealed. There aren't any spots on there that are vulnerable because they didn't stick correctly. So I'm just going to go on all of my edges and double check them, and then just work it through the middle, make sure there's no spots missed since there's such a big surface area on this one. And then I'm also going to go ahead and hit the border of this. Now on all of my projects, whether the tissue paper or napkin or whatever the paper is that I'm using to Mod Podge down if it covers the entire item, I cover the entire tissue paper. If it doesn't, I still go back and do a solid coat on the entire item. I do this because once it dries, the Mod Podge will have a different sheen than the item, or than the area on that item that like may not have the paper on it, and you can clearly tell where the Mod Podge ended, and I hate that. I like it to all look nice and solid in one piece, so I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I hit that entire border, 1 to seal it in, and 2 to make it all look cohesive. When the light hits it, you're not going to have any weird spots where you can see where I had Mod Podged and where I hadn't, and it just makes it look a lot more professional and less handmade, which we love our handmade products. Obviously, that's the way we do them and the feel that it gives us. However, we do also like a professional finish, so that's what I'm doing there, is just making sure it's all enclosed together. Now it's time to merge these two pieces. I got my little measuring tape out, and I measured everything to make sure it's nice and centered from top to bottom and side to side. And then I am marking it with a pencil to know where I'm going to drill some holes. Now I'm going to use a tiny drill bit, and I'm going to drill holes all the way through the back. I'm going to just do this on my work table, so you see me using those signs that will be in the next project as kind of to lift it off the table so I don't drill through my table. And then I'm going to use some floral wire to attach this. So I'm just going to drill holes all the way through. I did 3 different sections with 2 holes each, 1 on each side of where like the grapevine or of the bird piece will go. Sorry, I'm rambling. And so I did, like I said, 2 holes, 1 on each side of where the vine will go in 3 different sets. And I'm just going to use some green floral wire. If your floral wire doesn't match or looks crazy when you add it, what I would do, I'm not going to because this blended really well, but I would have just taken that same bronze paint and painted it to look the same as the vining on here, or just kind of make it disappear into the background. I'm going to cut off the amount that I need, actually a little bit more than what I need, because you don't want to have very little bit to tie in the back. You want to make sure you have plenty left. I'm going to fold it into a U shape, and I'm going to work it down into those 2 holes, making sure that there is a wire on either side of the bird, the metal vining that goes through, to make sure it's secured down. I'm going to pull it through the back and give it a twist. From there, I'm going to use some of my, these are kind of needle nose pliers. They're like square edged though, and I'm just going to twist it a few times, pulling it tight and nice and taut to make sure that that bird's not loose on the front. And from there, I'm just going to use my fingers to twist several loops in it, and then I'm going to fold it down and kind of wrap it around itself. I'm going to cut off any of the excess, like if there's a ton of excess, and then again just kind of like loop it and fold it down nice and flat against the back of this sign. I don't want any of those wires sticking out to, one, poke anyone, but two, if it's on someone's wall and if it shifts or anything, I don't want it scraping up their wall or scratching their paint. So I'm just going to push those down, and then I'm going to use a little bit of hot glue to kind of secure them in place and act as a buffer to keep them from being able to scratch or poke anything. This is done. You can see I've already added my hanger to it, and I'm going to take it outside and just give it a spray of this 2X Ultra Matte Rust-Oleum just to kind of make sure everything is nice and coated. I had to seal my bird, and I had to seal that backing that I did. I loved that project. Let me know in the comments below which one has been your favorite so far. Here I have two signs that I picked up thrifting a while back. I picked them up for $1 each and was hoping to be able to get the damaged photos or picture on the front off pretty easily. That was not my luck, so I am using a little scraper here. I can't find my little razor scraper tool. I don't put things back, so that's my own fault. But I'm just going to scrape it all off and get it down to as smooth as possible so that I can use this for this project. I'm doing one at a time because if it doesn't turn out well enough, I'm not going to put the effort in to scrape the other side off. So I'm using that same yellow paint. I just want to go ahead and use it up before it dries out on me. I'm also using chalk paint because it's thicker and it'll help hide all of that like rougher texture in the background of this from that like cardboard or that, that picture that was posted on there. So I'm just going to give it a nice healthy coat, making sure I'm coating the entire background, and then I'm going to dry it with my heat gun, of course, so that we can do a napkin decoupage on here. I have some really pretty napkins. I got all of these from Amazon. You can link them in the description if you're interested in any of these images. They're very beautiful and vibrant and full of life, and I love them. So here I'm just kind of dry. I always like to dry fit whatever I'm putting down to kind of visualize the project. Once I get it to where I want to, I'm going to just cut out the parts of the napkin that I want, and then we're going to peel it back. Napkins typically have 2 to 3 layers, and you want to pull off those extra layers. That way you don't have any unnecessary peeling in the future if the Mod Podge didn't go through all the layers, but also just to give it a nice crisp image. So here you can see that this napkin has 3 layers, and I am just very gently finding the area between those 2 layers, and I am pulling it back. It can rip very easily, so you want to be very careful, go nice and slow, and peel it, and you can see how much more translucent the front of that napkin is now, and that's just going to allow it to adhere really well. With it having being a white napkin for the background, that's going to kind of just become translucent when it absorbs the Mod Podge and it be nice and clear. So you'll see that this pale yellow pops in the background of this and looks very pretty with this image. So we're going to repeat the same steps as usual. We're just going to paint on our Mod Podge, making sure there's no areas of buildup, putting it out smooth, taking into consideration that this napkin is way thinner than the tissue paper, so we don't need as much Mod Podge. Or if you do use the same amount, you will not be able to smooth it out very well because it's going to absorb all of that Mod Podge almost immediately, and it's going to make it a little bit harder. If you use too much, your napkin will start to disintegrate or you'll kind of lose some of your colors. And then you definitely can't use just your fingers to smooth it out because it'll be too wet and it'll start to just stick to you and rip and move around. So again, take that into consideration whenever you're using a napkin or just whenever you're using different materials. Once you have it down in place, you can take some of that Mod Podge and do your top layer. Again, working from the center outward towards your edges. That way you are not accidentally ripping or peeling any of the edges back. And this is not going to take near as much Mod Podge again as that tissue paper. So I'm just going to do a nice thin even layer over all of it. And then I'm going to use my heat gun and dry it. Because it absorbs that Mod Podge so well, it actually dries way quicker as well. So I just love napkins. They have those beautiful crisp images. They peel back really well, and they make it nice and easy because they just absorb that product really well, dry fast, and then just leave this beautiful image behind. So I highly recommend using napkins. They're also cheap. You can get multiple, and yeah, love them. Can't say enough. Anyway, let's dry it out, and then we're going to use our sanding block and sand down those edges. I'm going to try to be really careful here because the edges of this sign are actually metal, and I don't want to do any damage to it. So we're going to sand it back, get those crisp, clean edges, and then because this did turn out so well in that texture that was kind of left in the background of like that MDF cardboard, it kind of like went away. You can still kind of see some of it, but really you don't notice it at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and work on that second sign by peeling and scraping that back down to be as smooth as possible. And then I'm going to use another set of napkins that I have that are a sunflower pattern that are also really beautiful. They still kind of go with the theme of this one, but it's just a bit different. I have already prepped this napkin by cutting down the image parts that I want and peeling back the multiple layers. And now I'm just kind of doing the fitting on here. I had already dry fit it and everything, so put my Mod Podge down, and now I'm just laying it out to smooth it out and add on my top layer. Here you see that it's the same image, so what I'm doing is I'm just kind of rotating it over to where the parts of the image that repeat don't show up on the face of it. So though it's the same image, it's not too overwhelming or too noticeable because of how I've placed it. So I have the big, most focal flower on the left side, and then those two additional flowers on the right side, to where you can tell that they go together and they might be the same image, but it's not the exact same image repeating itself. So how you lay it down can play a difference and can completely change up what your picture is going to look like. So here you can see where the top of my napkin ends on this sign, and it feels really plain up there. I'm not against any negative space, but with the napkin being so visible of where it starts and ends, I definitely wanted to hide that a little bit. So I cut some of the purple flowers from a leftover portion of that napkin, peeled it back, and now I'm just going to Mod Podge it right on top of the other napkin that's down there. I'm going to add my layer underneath, place it where I want it to, and then Mod Podge over top, and you're going to see it kind of just melt into the other napkin and hide that seam a little bit better, make it a little less noticeable. And so now that I have both of these signs done, I'm going to kind of play around with them just like I did with the purple flowers. I'm going to cut out different portions of the napkins and place them down where I think there might be too much negative space or a seam that needs hidden. So I did that with both pieces. Here you can see me adding another little lavender to this one to kind of hide that and clear up that dead space a little bit. And I love how these turned out. I wasn't sure at first, but it ended up smoothing out really well and turning out super cute. You can see both images at the end of the video. Here we have this little flower pot. It's last but not least, but I just wanted to show you just another different type of surface you can work on. And this one is just a little terracotta pot that I picked up from the Dollar Tree. And I'm going to use one of these leftover napkins to Mod Podge an area on here. So I'm just going to, again, dry fit my image, see where I want it to go, and then peel back those layers. This napkin has 3. You can kind of tell what by how see-through it is, whether there's still another layer on there. And then I'm going to start adding my Mod Podge. You can see here I use something, when you have something around that's going to roll on you, you can kind of pin it in place with different items, lint rollers, or here I just grabbed some scissors and my scraper. And then I'm going to paint on my Mod Podge. Now I'm going to tell you, this dried so quickly. I assume it's just the material of that terracotta. It just kind of like soaked up that Mod Podge, and it dried almost instantly. Like, this is in real time, and you'll see when I go to put my image on here, it doesn't stick at all. It's completely dried already. So I had to kind of figure it out. I was like, what is going on? Why is this not sticking? So I had to go back and add a second layer, and that second layer left it to where it was workable for a little bit longer because it already had that first layer down. So I'm just going to add that second layer again, making sure that I don't have any like goopy spots. And when you work on a round area, it is a lot harder to keep everything wrinkle free. So you just want to take it very slow and work from your center point outward. So you see here, I'm going to lay it down And then I'm going to start right here on the top in the center, and I'm going to slowly work it around that curve. You don't want to go fast because it is more susceptible to rip on you. So just take it nice and slow, smooth out as many wrinkles as you can, and then you can go ahead and start flattening it down and then adding your Mod Podge on top. Which actually, just kidding, I forgot that I had left this portion up here dry so that I can make it fit a little bit better. So I'm just going to roll that napkin back very carefully, fold it down so that I can Mod Podge the top of this, and fold that back over. Since there is a lip on there, it was just easier to manage by doing it in 2 sections. And then from there, I'm going to add that top layer. Again, as I'm going to repeat myself 1,000 times, you're going to work towards the outward edge to keep the napkin from wrinkling or folding over or ripping itself. I'm going to cover it with a nice good top coat, and then I'm also, as you can see here where the Mod Podge is going on, it's going to dry that darker color. So it's not just because it's wet, it changes the color of the pot a little bit. So I did put more images around the back of this pot, but on any of the areas where there's not the piece of napkin, I went ahead and covered that with Mod Podge too. That way it all dries in one even sheen and color, just so you don't see where the Mod Podge starts and stops. I'm going to let it dry and then again sand back all of those edges, and I think this turned out really cute. I mean, I was just kind of doing it to see how it would stick, but I love it. So I'm going to take you guys in for a closer look. I hope this video was very helpful for you. Leave me a comment in the comments below on which one was your favorite item, and did you learn anything, or do you have any tips or tricks to leave for myself or any of my viewers? We would love to hear from you. I really enjoy you being here. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and consider subscribing. I'll see you next time.